on Hollywood Boulevard, and when George came on the screen, see, no one knew he had done Superman. Fred Zinnemann, who directed it, didn't know that. The studio didn't know it. All the studio brass were there. It was the biggest film of the year. When George came on the screen, this preview audience began to scream Superman, and this monumentally important film was compromised because of the presence of Superman in it. And he was doing a serious part, seriously performing. He was wonderful, but they recognized him as Superman, and they started to scream Superman. The studio didn't know what had happened. They realized shortly after the preview was over, and George was all but cut out of the film. Mm-hmm. You can still see him in a couple close-ups, just very quickly. He has a line here and there that they weren't able to cut, but he never really worked again. Without a mustache. He played in a Marlene Dietrich film, Rancho Notorious, with a mustache and Latin makeup. But he couldn't perform in a serious film. The audiences, they love you for what you do. They recognize you for your television series, your television identity. But it interferes with a, in quotes, major and prestigious film.
Jack, do you feel that that in any way contributed to his death?
Certainly I do. I do feel that. I feel that George, he was a very gifted actor. He had studied at the Royal Academy in England. He was a marvelous man. Could do all the Shakespearean roles he had done not long before we did Superman. He had done Tybalt, was a very fine fencer. And he'd had an early stardom in films for Paramount. He'd co-starred with Claudette Colbert in So Proudly We Hail, and Mira Oberon in a film called Lydia. And then he was one of the people that went early into the war, the Second World War. And he stayed in the service long after other people like William Holden came out. Somehow George stayed in too long, though he had become a genuine romantic star of some distinction, you see, before the war, or just in the very early part of the Second World War. When he came out, it was too late, and he never got reestablished. And he did some B films, he did some things, and I think he picked up Superman the same way I did, to make some money, didn't know it would type him, didn't know he would stay Superman forever, which he has, and which certainly I have. If I wanted to act today, my experience has been when I go up to New York, to a real city. I live in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, we drive around in automobiles. You're not so open to your audience, or your fans, or people, knowing you. But in New York, when I try to take a subway, to this very day, I seem to be recognizable. I seem to, even after all these years, look pretty much the same. And people, I don't have a freedom of movement in New York. People know me as Jimmy Olsen. Anything I try to do. I had an opera open at Lincoln Center. It was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera. When we did our press conference, before that opera was to go into production, in a most distinguished manner, Associated Press insisted on doing a major article, which turned out to be, Jimmy Olsen writes an opera. Which was, appeared really internationally. But I can't do anything that identity doesn't come in and overtake it. It's obviously the most visible thing that I've done, and I suppose when I'm much older and much grayer, I'll still be Jimmy Olsen. Superman's pal.
Does it worry you?
No. I now enjoy it. It doesn't worry me. It did for a long time. I had a very mixed feeling about it because they paid us very poorly to do the Superman show. We made nothing, in comparison to what people make today, of course, it would be absurd. But even for that time, we were under long-term contracts, were paid very poorly, and had very poor residual protection. So in other words, our residuals ran out very early on. I got the last money I ever got from the repeats in 1962. And I felt, since it is kind of, in a way, the Indians and primitive people often feel that photography, if they take a photograph of you, it steals your soul, that your soul has been captured. And somehow I felt that a great deal of me had been captured in the Superman show, and I was going on imprisoned in it, but wasn't getting any. If I had wanted to work as an actor, I really wouldn't have been able to easily, and they were, I can describe it in the Dickinsonian term of the word mean. They were very mean about paying us, or even interested in making it right, we'll say, with more money. So I refused for those years to ever give an interview, to ever do anything. As a matter of fact, it was only a year ago, after the opera was done and the Associated Press broke the story, and I realized that people enjoyed knowing what I was doing now, and that the sky didn't fall in on me. It didn't ruin the work I'm doing now. They had an affection for me, working in, we'll say, in quote, serious literary forms. And the Superman thing was only an added dimension. And I did, after that, a couple of shows. I did the NBC has a show called Weekend, and I did the Tomorrow Show and Good Morning America, because I had a ballet opening in New York, a ballet based on my work, on a dramatic poem of mine, set to music. And I got such a feedback from people, and I realized that what came back to me out of the Superman show, though it certainly wasn't money, it was a great deal of love from people. People have affection for that. They have affection for the characters, and I'd be a fool not to appreciate people's affection for Jimmy Olsen and for those performances years ago that reflect themselves on me today. It's a very loving thing, and so I enjoy it, is the answer to that. And I'm sorry I deprived myself all those years of that, but I did. I hid from it because I figured if they didn't pay me for it, why should I do it?
It's interesting that you should feel that way, because just listening to you then, Jack, and your explanation of how you felt about it for so many years, it suddenly does come completely home to someone like myself, just how Superman has affected the lives of so many people. There's yourself, George Reeves, Noel Neal, whom we've spoken to already, a real charmer she is, isn't she?
Yes, she is. Yes, she is.
And also Kirk Allen, of course, who played in the feature movie. Do you...
Yes, I never knew him. I know he did the serial, it was.
Yeah, I beg your pardon. And I think he made one feature movie, unimportant anyway.
Yes.
If you had your choice, Jack, hypothetically, this has to be, of course, would you take the role again?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I've learned things in life from it. The main thing I learned from it was, years later, you never know what choices you're making. I've discovered at the time that I did it, and at the time I was doing it, I wouldn't have done it, let me put it that way, because I had opportunities to do things. I could have done the sailor in The Rose Tattoo in the film with Shirley Booth. I had done a previous film with her. And the Superman show interfered with that. I could have done things that looked more glamorous. But it's very hard to judge what is long-lasting and what is the correct thing for you to do. I now know that having done the Superman show was like being one of the Keystone Cops. It was like being Chester Conklin, Ben Turpin. It was like being an early Senate player. We were early in television. We somehow, as I said, people feel an affection for people that were in that show. I recognize it in my life. I'm grateful for it. If I'd done more glamorous things at the time, I mean, there's movies that I would have died to have done when I was acting, like The Rose Tattoo. And I simply couldn't do it because I was under contract to the Superman people. They wouldn't loan me to let me do it. It would have been nothing to have done The Rose Tattoo. A lot of the things that I could have done that would interfered with, it would have been, I now see, a lesser thing that the Superman show, though it seemed low down at the time, had a lasting classical impression. It's from early television. It's one of the film classics, television classics. It's been on the air all these years. It's still on in Los Angeles, and I guess it will just it will go on, as I said, until I'm an old doddering man. And of course, I'm very grateful, and I would now choose, of course, to have done that again. At the time, I wouldn't have chosen, no. But now I would choose it because I'm grateful to have been a part of something that gave people that joy and has had that longevity.
Jack, on a lighter note, how did you handle that very, very heavy makeup that was required in those early years?
I wouldn't wear it. That's how I handled it. I got a very bad reputation for being difficult. I hated makeup. I guess it made me feel like an actor. Hated feeling like an actor, and I just wouldn't wear it. And the cameramen and I would always get off. We'd have a series of cameramen, and they would I'd get off to a very bad start with them because they have to light you more carefully. If you don't wear makeup, if you've got a lot of makeup on, they can just do a kind of flat lighting. And I just wouldn't wear it. And that was it. I was very difficult about it, but I hated it. It made me feel unhappy to be in makeup.
Jack,
always did, except on the stage. Then you've got hundreds of people out there, and you have to feel like a different creature with all these people staring at you. But on film, it's a more personal medium, and though I've complained against naturalism, I like to feel natural, and makeup it always made me feel unclean. I had this thick, I wanted to wash my face all day if I had it on. So I wouldn't wear it, just wouldn't wear it.
Right. Tell us about the time that Superman had quite some difficulty with a wall.
Well, he had many difficulties with the wall, and I know they've done a film of Superman now, a multi-million-dollar film, and I'm wondering what difficulties they've had with the walls. The difficulty with the walls were consistent. The wall has to be a certain thickness, of course, in order to really get through it. It can't be something that's going to fall off, an eighth of an inch of plaster. It had to be a decent wall that he would break through, and that this kind of pseudo-plaster, it was a kind of pumice stone, would come flying everywhere. It had to have some resistance, but it had to be light enough that, of course, George could, with one great push, get through it. And sometimes our wonderful special effects man, Cy Simonson, would build these walls, and it was always very a tenuous thing to have the wall, because if the wall didn't work properly, the whole set would have to close down for hours while he would redo the wall, because you don't have all that many sets. We didn't have backup sets, in other words. We'd have a wall, and it was ready for George to come through. And Noel, generally, Lois Lane and I would be chained to a chair or to somewhere with a bomb at our feet, and George would come breaking through this wall, go to the bomb, tear out the fuse or throw the bomb through a window, and then there would be a cut. He'd have to do continuous action from the break through the wall. Well, sometimes we'd be slow and the wall would set too hard, and George would do a mighty leap and wouldn't get through it. And once he really got stuck in the wall. His arm got through. It hurt him, actually, his arm and his head, and I think a knee got through the wall, and I heard George let out quite a bit of stable language as he was stuck in the wall, and he picked up his cape and marched off the set until they got the walls right. He was very, very funny. When George would get angry, he always smoked with a long cigarette holder, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt had. It was a black cigarette holder, and George would light up a cigarette with his long cigarette holder and stand there fuming with his cape. He was always very sweet and somehow very funny, and funniest when he was angry. That made him furious when the walls didn't work.
That builds up a beautiful mind picture of Superman standing there with hand on hip and the old cigarette holder fuming.
Well, he'd do it. George was very much what we call in the United States a camp. And he would often, when I'd be tied somewhere or something, he would say, "Don't you worry, because your Superman's going to save you," and he'd blow me kisses, like through a window or something. I'd be all bound and gagged and waiting, and he'd blow me these kisses through the window, and then he'd come through a wall and save me, and he'd be Superman. But I'm not implying he was effeminate. He wasn't. But he was in an old theater tradition where people are campy, you know.
Yep.
He was, and he would sometimes pick up his cape and absolutely mince out of the set. Very funny. As a matter of fact, I've said to friends, because they wonder how Jimmy is generally laughing and his good humor in the shows, and people have asked me, how did you keep up that good humor, the buoyancy? And I've always said, if you worked with George, you would have too, because he was always terribly funny and kept me laughing and exactly camping. But as I said, when it would be my reverse, my close-up, he'd blow me little kisses. He'd pucker up his lips and say, "Oh, you're wonderful, and I'm going to save you." He's terribly funny, sweet, sweet guy.
Jack, I do want to thank you for giving us your time. It's been tremendous talking to you this morning, and you've given us a further insight into the making of Superman, and also a further insight into George Reeves, the man. It's It's a great tragedy that he's not around today.
It is to me, and I'm sure to many people. And might I just say something? I'm so happy to be talking to Australia and to you.